Hey everyone, it's Kaycienikole, and today we're going to go over a core focused transition that we often do in a vinyasa class or a lot of the yang based yoga classes. And it's a transition that is very challenging, but we do it often. And so it's important that we learn the core muscles, how to activate and warm, and how to actually set up the transition so that we, when utilizing the core, can move as seamlessly as possible through the transition. So I'm going to show you what the transition is from downward dog, learning how to step forward with control. Okay, stepping forward from your three-legged dog to the top of the mat. Now, if you've done this transition before, you know it's not always easy, right? There's a lot involved with it. I do have 2 blocks that I'll be using today. So I recommend that you have them because it makes the transition a lot easier, especially when you're working on being able to progress yourself through the transition. Now, before we get started, we will do a little bit of core warming, and that way we feel a little more prepared to come into the position. But what we're going to do is we're going to break down more of the steps or details to get yourself through the transition and how to work on building strength and movements that move you more with integrity versus, throwing our bodies around or making modifications that don't actually work us in a progressive way. Being able to work progressively is so, so important because we want to activate the same muscle groups to step us forward and back that we would actually be using so that we are seeing progress over time, not just modifying and simplifying the process and never actually using those muscles, right? We want to use them. So we're going to come into a seated position. We'll do a little core warming, and then we'll get ourselves through the details of the actual transition itself, okay? So the transition is going to involve a lot of core and hip flexor work. So I'm going to show first kind of more of the hip flexor connection to the core, and then we're going to focus on hollowing our body out, creating more flexion in our spine so that we can create space underneath us to be able to move our legs more freely. So we're going to take 2 shapes. And I want you to really kind of think about what we're doing in the shapes so that when we get into the transition, we can use that muscle memory and these established movements to help us create better transitions and step forwards, okay? So let's bend the knees, walk the feet in, weight in your sit bones. Now from here, bring the legs together, hands hold the backs of your thighs. You're going to start by lifting up through the chest, roll the shoulders down away from the ears. This is going to be more focused on hip flexors and the connection to the core. So lean back a little bit, come up onto your toes. You can walk the feet in or out however much you need. And then from here, we're going to work on trying to hover the feet while maintaining a nice lifted spine. And then see if you can from here, if they need to touch back down, that's okay. Next step would be lifting your calves parallel with the ground. Next step might be reaching the hands forward. Notice as I take each step that my body isn't compromising its shape to go into that next step. The body is holding and supporting the shape as I progress. Arms can reach forward, maybe the legs extend. It's entirely up to you, but what I want you to focus on is lifting your chest and then trying to pull your thighs closer towards your chest using your core. And hold here for 5. Breathe. 4, 3, 2, and 1. Go ahead and set the feet down. Relax over your legs here for a moment. Okay. So that's going to be really important as far as focusing on how to draw your knees towards your chest. You're decreasing that space between thighs and torso. And the more we can create that kind of sucking the legs in, the more we're able to create space to move our legs underneath our bodies once we're in that downward dog position. So really feel that connection of thighs to chest, okay? That position is going to be really, really helpful. Let's spin the legs around. Come into a tabletop position. Okay, so we know cat-cows, but just in case you need a little refresher here, when you inhale, you drop the belly into cow. This is going to create more of that back bend, that hammock shape. This is not the shape we're going to look for. We're going to do the opposite. So exhale, you're going to press through the hands and you're going to round your upper back and your shoulders into cat shape. Now hold here and just breathe. It doesn't have to be, the most engaged cat of your life, but just enough to feel the shape. Notice as you hollow out the belly, there's more space underneath you versus if you were neutral spine, there's less space, right? There's a lot less space between your belly and the floor than when you press and round and lift the navel towards the spine and you're lifting your upper back, you're creating this arch. That means you're now creating more hollow space underneath your body. This is what we're looking for. So now we're going to do it in conjunction with the core in a more active position, coming into plank. So let's start with plank position. And then from plank, as you extend the legs, tuck the toes, you find one long line from your heels to the crown of your head. Now, obviously from this position, there's space underneath us, but not a whole lot. So as you press to the hands, I want you to think cat pose. Round your upper back and your shoulders. Now, there's more space underneath of us. If we want more space, come up onto your tippy toes. Pike the hips up. Notice how much more space there is when we're pressing, we're rounding, we're lifting the navel, and we're coming up onto the tippy toes. If we don't come up onto the tippy toes, we lose all of that space. So tippy toes are going to be important here. I want you to walk the tippy toes in as much as you can, press with the hands, and then walk the tippy toes back. Okay, again, tippy toes walk in, tippy toes walk back. Drop the knees, sink the hips back, relax and breathe here. Okay, you go ahead and come up to a seated position. I'm going to give a quick demonstration so that you can kind of break down and analyze with me. So when we step forward from downward facing dog, in downward dog, we're in this piked shape, right? So there's a lot of space underneath of us. But as soon as we come forward into plank, there's less space underneath us. Look how much space there is between my hips and the ground in downward dog, as opposed to plank. A lot less space, okay? So from downward dog, if I come up onto my tippy toes first, and then I come forward, staying on my tippy toes and rounding my back, there's a lot more space, okay? That's a good point to notate because we're going to want to make sure we're creating as much space as possible. But when we're stepping through, if we focus on stepping through while lifting up onto the toes more from downward dog and then come forward, it's going to feel a little better than trying to just bring it forward and step directly from plank. If we avoid downward dog, we're also losing a lot of that space that we can be utilizing to step forward between the hands. Now, often what happens when we're trying to step forward is our foot gets caught along the way, okay? We get caught and then we have to drop the knee. We got to walk the foot forward. So that's still okay. You still might need to give yourself a little bit of assistance, okay? Perfectly fine. But we want to be able to decrease that amount of helping ourselves, right? Until we're seeing more and more progress in the position. And so what I like to work on is how to use props to work on the transition in a safe and progressive way. Now, before we get into that, I kind of want to show you the no-nos as far as ways that we often compromise the transition, thinking we're making it easier, but we might be making the transition itself easier as far as how to get the foot forward. But oftentimes we're compromising the muscle groups that are actually working to create progress in that position. So what often people will do is they'll swing the leg around to the side, okay? And that's using more momentum than anything. And it's saying, hey, I want to avoid having to use my hip flexors and my core and control. Instead, I'm just going to kind of fly it around to the side and bring it forward, okay? Now, does it get the foot where you want it to go? Yes. Does it work the muscle groups in the same way to work this position in a progressive manner? No. And that's why I don't like teaching that variation, okay? I like to work transitions that are making things more accessible. I have also seen people transition more from on the knees and stepping forward from here. Okay, that's fine. But once again, you're not working a progressive sequence. Are you in a class still activating the same muscle groups to be able to step forward from here? No, right? You're losing the engagement, the rounding, the understanding of what's happening in the body to create that movement. We're avoiding a lot of the steps. Still gets you there. So you can still use these as steps. If you're like, hey, I have no interest in actually building progress in that transition, fine. Go ahead and just step forward. Perfectly fine from whatever position or transition that you want to go through. If you want to swing it out, swing it out. If you want to come up onto your knees, step forward, you can do that as well. You can also start at the top of the mat and just step a foot back and wiggle it back. Okay. And that obviously is a lot easier and more accessible transition. I would say a transition that you see a lot more often in a hatha yoga class. All of those are acceptable, perfectly fine, but none of them work the transition in a progressive manner to actually build those muscle groups stronger and be able to do these in the future. Okay. That's why I like working on progression. Now, another thing that typically happens when we're trying to step forward is we start to kind of peel the hand up. We come up onto the fingertips to create space. Now, I'll show you what that looks like. If I'm lifting a leg and I'm stepping it through and I just need a little more space, I kind of lift and I create the space for myself to step through by coming up onto the fingertips. So I'm also not a huge fan of this because when we lift, it's usually lifting one side because we still need the stability of our hands. And so what we do is we teach our body now to favor a side or put weight more in one side than the other. So there's not an evenness to that transition. We're favoring a side, building more strength in one side, and starting to almost alleviate any of the work on the other side to make it easier for ourselves. Not my favorite way, unless it's a very strategic, method that you're incorporating into your class for whatever reason. Make sure it has purpose as to why you're doing it that way. But I typically don't like peeling the hands up because you're losing the connection point of that position and with the working progress towards being able to build up towards that transition. So instead of peeling the hands off the ground, the hand peeling makes it easier, but we're not always looking for easier. We're looking for a way to create a better modification that still builds those levels and those steps. That's why I like the blocks, because you can do exactly that. You can replicate the exact same movement, but in a way that creates more space. So we're going to take our blocks and we're going to take them up to the highest point, about shoulder width apart. Okay, shoulder width is going to be really important here because that's about how wide your hands are going to be normally. Now notice if they're highest on their points, they're a little bit less stable. So it's really, really important that we're pressing directly down, that we're not pushing out to the sides or being wonky with our hands. Okay, we want to keep shoulders over wrists and the hands pressing directly down into the ground. If you're like, well, that's not working for me today, you can take it down one notch. But the less space you have underneath your hands, the harder your core is going to have to work, okay? So I'm going to show first and then we'll do it together. As I come up, I'm going to come into downward dog. Now notice my hands are on the ground, so it's not going to look like a perfect downward dog. That's okay. Now also, I need to be careful because I'm creating an angle now. My shoulders are no longer stacked over my wrists. They will be soon, but just be mindful that you're not pushing and lifting edges of your block. Adjust your hands however you need to. Okay, I'm going to lift a leg up and then I'm going to come up onto my toes. I'm going to press through my hands around my back and I'm going to draw my knee in and I'm going to use the engagement of my quads, my hip flexors and core to try to pull my knee to my chest. And then I'm going to hollow out, rounding my back, pressing through the hands. I'm going to come up onto my back toes to create as much space as I can to try to step forward and set the foot. Now you can even try to hover your foot and that's going to really work those core muscle engagements, okay? So let's go ahead, make your way into downward dog. Find your blocks up on their highest setting or whatever setting feels comfortable for you. We're going to start with the right leg, lift it up, okay? Now, first, let's just come up onto your left toes. So we're doing that right off the bat. And then exhale, bring your right knee to your chest. As you do, shift your weight forward. Bring your shoulders over the wrists. Try to keep your thigh glued to your chest, and then press your hands round your upper back and shoulders. Create space underneath you. Come up onto those back toes. And then from here, step your right foot between the hands. Nice. Step it back. Let's do the other side. Left leg up. Knee to your chest. Bring your shoulders over your wrists. Come up onto your right toes. Round and hollow out underneath you. Create space to then step the left foot between the hands. All right. Come down. Set the blocks to the side for now. So as you can see, it's the exact same movement, which means we're doing the exact same muscle focus, but all we're doing is we're creating higher lift away from the ground. The more the hands lift away from the ground, the easier it becomes, but rather than favoring a side and not using the full weight of both of our hands evenly and well balanced, this allows us to feel the full connection to the movement. We're doing the exact same thing, just lifting our hands up a little higher to create more space between our bodies and the floor to step through. Now, you can work on bringing the blocks lower and lower to the ground until you're able to work this transition while keeping your hands planted and not letting them peel up. And keep in mind, just as you work on stepping forward, you can also work the same muscle groups by trying to step back with control. So let's say you finish a flow. Hands come down and the teacher says, step back to take your vinyasa, right? Now, typically what we do is we just slide the foot back and you can kind of get this like slippery, zippery sound. So it kind of zips back, okay? There's no core, okay? If we work the core in the reverse, we're also going to build progression. So when my foot's forward, I'm going to press through my hands, round my upper back. I'm going to come up onto my back toes, and I'm going to try to step back with control. And then I can go through my vinyasa or whatever movements I'd like. You're working the same thing, but in a reverse motion. Same muscles, just in the reverse, stepping forward and stepping back. So let's do this a few more times. You can choose to have your blocks on any setting that you want, or if you just want to work on it without the blocks, just make sure you're not peeling up the hands or doing little wonky modifications, okay? We want to work the actual progression of the pose. So with your blocks, downward dog, right leg up, inhale, come up onto your left toes, exhale, knee to your chest, press to your hands, shoulders over wrists, round and step. Now from here, you're going to press to the hands, round your upper back, come up onto the back toes, try to hover your foot, step it back, downward dog. Inhale, left leg up. Exhale, knee to your chest, come up onto your right toes, shoulders over wrists, hollow out, and step. Reversing it, press to the hands, round your upper back and shoulders, hollow out, come up onto the back toes, hover, knee to chest, step it back, plank, and downward dog. Okay, go ahead and do that a few more times on your own. Right leg and then left leg. Move with control. Try to feel your back toes. Try to feel the hollowing out, the rounding, the pressing, and the slow controlled movements. Also, even movements. You're not favoring a side. You're feeling everything nice, well balanced. Once you're done, let's drop the knees, the blocks out of the way, sink the hips, and just relax your spine. Okay. Coming up to a seated position, any seat of your choosing, interlace your fingers, and just go ahead and roll out the wrists a little bit here. Shake it out. Alrighty, so this was a very game-changing realization for me in my practice and how to work more effectively with those transitions. And it's also the way I work with my clients when they're wanting to find modifications or ways that make it easier for them to step forward on their mats. Just know, modify in a way that still brings mindfulness and integrity into the practice. We're not just throwing our bodies around willy-nilly and seeing how we can potentially get there. Mindfulness is the key. So hopefully you enjoyed this information. I love breaking things down in more of a workshop style, so would love your feedback. Otherwise, I'll be seeing y'all again soon.